Wow, aren't we lucky to have heard that original recording of a woman making a creme brulee with a blowtorch in a kitchen in 1521. Quite incredible that they had blowtorches back then and that creme brulees were a thing. Remarkable stuff. Oh, hello there, and welcome back to the Final Couplet podcast with me, Theo Cowan. I'm going to give a quick shout out today for a little book that I've been using to just work out what some words meant back in Shakespeare's time. And it's great because you look up the word and it gives you an example from a Shakespeare play or sonnet that it's used in. And it's called A Shakespeare Glossary by C.T. Onions. Hell of a name, by the way, C.T. Onions. It almost sounds like it's a joke book. Like it's full of practical jokes and sort of one-liners. But no, it's got some really great, insightful information about Shakespeare words, and I highly suggest you go out and get it. And this isn't an advertisement. C.T. Onions has not been in touch with me to say, Theo, get my book on the poddy and we'll split 50-50 any profits that I make from the C.T. Onions book. No, this is just me saying it's a good book, all right? Isn't that fine? Can't we do that in this day and age? Does everything have to be a paid advertisement? Or can't we just suggest things anymore, for God's sake? Anyway, that's enough of that rant. Today we're looking at Sonnet 59, and that is one away from Sonnet 60, of course. And I'm hoping Sonnet 60 is a big hitter because we've had some pretty rough sonnets recently about Shakespeare being a slave and just waiting around while his lover goes off and has sex with other people and doing all that sort of stuff, which has not been an enjoyable read particularly. So without further ado, let's take a listen to Sonnet 59. If there be nothing new, but that which is hath been before, how are our brains beguil'd, which, labouring for invention, bear amiss the second burthen of a former child. Oh, that record could with a backward look, even of 500 courses of the sun, show me your image in some antique book, since mind at first in character was done, that I might see what the old world could say to this composed wonder of your frame. Whether we are mended, or whe'r better they, or whether revolution be the same. Oh, sure I am the wits of former days, to subjects worse have given admiring praise. Well, I think it's great that he's not talking so much about slavery anymore, and actually this Sonnet 59 has some really interesting themes, I think, that are very current today and what a lot of writers talk about and are facing in terms of being original and a writer's block and all that. So I think we should dive into this and work out what the hell Shakespeare was going on about in Sonnet 59. So we start with, if there be nothing new, but that which is hath been before, how are our brains beguil'd, which, labouring for invention, bear amiss the second burthen of a former child. Now these first four lines may seem like a bit of a mouthful, and they are initially, but when you break down the meaning, I think it's great. So he's saying, if there's nothing new, and everything that exists now has existed forever, then our brains are being deceived when we desperately struggle to write something new and exciting and still end up with an imitation of an imitation. So the second burthen of a former child, the imitation of an imitation. So we can try and write all these new amazing things and we struggle often to come up with new ideas, but we still end up producing this bloody imitation of something that has already been before. And so I think it's kind of amazing that Shakespeare's talking about originality and how potentially he struggles to come up with new forms and new ideas and new descriptions, because he's so thought of as, the pinnacle of writing and originality. So I think it's cool that he's writing about this in this sonnet. Anyway, we continue with, "Oh, that record could with a backward look, even of 500 courses of the sun, show me your image in some antique book." And here he's saying, if only I could look back into the records as far as 500 years and find a description of you in an old book. That would be amazing. I'd love to see how someone would describe you back then. Obviously, he's talking about the recipient of the poem here. "Since mind at first in character was done." So I think this means written when people were just starting to put their thoughts into writing. But it's a nicer way of putting it, isn't it? "Since mind at first in character was done." That's a lovely phrase. And I don't often say that about Shakespeare's stuff. I feel like I'm very hard on him, but that's a really beautiful, beautiful line. "That I might see what the old world could say to this composed wonder of your frame." So he's continuing on in the same thought. He's saying, I'd love to go back 500 years to see what someone had written about you, so I could see what the old world would say about your amazing body or frame. Interesting that he goes for the body there, and how they would describe the body rather than say the personality. So he's saying, I'd love to see how someone would describe your sexy body. I'd love to see how someone would talk about your rippling abs and your lovely big pecs and your nice biceps. I mean, maybe frame is he's talking about frame is all encompassing, the whole body, the person, everything that comes with it. But I like to think that he actually just wants to see how someone would describe his nice sexy body. "Whether we are mended, or whe'r better they, or whether revolution be the same." So here he's saying he wants to see whether we're better at writing now, or whether we're actually worse and they were better, or whether things are pretty much the same. And maybe that's what we think about now, in a way, when we actually have the ability to look back 500 years and have a look at Shakespeare's writing and think, are we better now? Are we better now, or were they better? And I guess the jury's out on that one, but it seems like Shakespeare, he wouldn't still be around if his writing was really bad, So we must consider his writing amazing, and we can learn a lot from it. And there are a lot of similarities in what he writes about to what we write about. I mean, is EastEnders, the famous BBC British soap, is that better than Shakespeare? I guess is one of the questions we can ask ourselves. And the answer is undoubtedly yes. Yes, it is. So I think these questions that he's asking himself are very relevant to what we can ask ourselves as writers now. But of course, we don't need to ask the question, because we can actually look back 500 years ago and look at that writing, luckily for us. And now for the final couplet. "Oh, sure I am the wits of former days, to subjects worse have given admiring praise." And here he's saying, I'm sure that the wits, the clever writers of former days, have given praise and admiration to subjects far worse than you, the recipient of the poem. So although he's bringing it back to the recipient of the poem, in the end, it does seem like the sonnet is less about, less focused on his lover in this one. And it's more about writing in general and the struggles of imitation and being original. I really like this one, and I think it's going in my top 10 sonnets so far. There, I said it. I don't know what else is in there, but this one goes in. I think it's It's a really nice one, and actually has made me think a lot about writing and originality and how we describe people in writing and how it's changed over the years. I mean, even thinking about Shakespeare's writing now, it's so flowery and so unashamedly passionate, which I think is maybe a thing that we don't have so much now. We're quite dry in our writing, and maybe in a way we can compare our sort of rom-coms that we have now to Shakespeare back then, because we do think of them as sort of soppy in a way, but they are unashamedly passionate. Yeah, that's right, I compared Shakespeare to rom-coms. Right, I think it's about time we put this to our story. If you remember, last week, Shakespeare was still going on about being Christopher Marlowe's slave, and he'd sent another sonnet to Christopher Marlowe out in Barbados via Mercutio, Shakespeare's cat. And Shakespeare's cat also became an alcoholic, which was quite intense. And I didn't see that one coming. But he's arrived at Barbados, and Christopher Marlowe's lying about. He's got loads of hot men around him, and he's just read Sonnet 58. Let's see what happens next. Christopher Marlowe finishes reading Shakespeare's Sonnet 58. He chuckles to himself and tells the hot men around him, "Ha ha, fellas, I have a slave, and it's the famous writer Shakespeare." And they all laugh together in glee. I don't know why the hot guys are laughing. They just are happy to be there and around Christopher Marlowe because he's so gorgeous and charismatic. Christopher Marlowe says to Mercutio, "Why don't you stay for a bit, Cattykins?" That's what he started calling him, annoyingly. "Why don't you stay for a bit and have a few pina coladas and hang out on the beach for a few weeks?" I don't know why he's gone Australian. I guess he has some Australian heritage that I haven't talked about before. And Mercutio looks up at him and nods his head. He can't think of anything better than staying with Christopher Marlowe and having a few pina coladas. Meanwhile, back in London, Shakespeare is pacing around his kitchen. He is desperate for Mercutio to return with news from Christopher Marlowe. He wants a letter back from Christopher Marlowe, just saying anything, but then he keeps telling himself, no, Shakespeare, your last two sonnets were all about how you'll wait patiently and not get annoyed, so probably best to just focus on some writing. Use this time to write some more sonnets and hone your craft. So he sits down at his little writer's desk and writes for a good 4 or 5 hours. Eventually he reads back the poems that he's written, and he's fuming. He's going, "Oh, Shakespeare, you idiot! There's nothing new in these poems. They're all old, stupid imitations of other writers throughout the years. This is bad. This is bad writing." And he starts to cry. And he cries and cries, and all the poems that he's written get wet and soggy, and you can hardly make them out anymore. He scrunches them up furiously and throws them into the bin. And then suddenly he thinks, aha, I'm going to write a sonnet about how hard it is to write new writing. Now that is something no other writers have done before. Shakespeare, you're a genius. So he sits down and pens Sonnet 59. He thinks, this is cool, like this is a cool poem. And it's a nice sonnet, but I'm Christopher Marlowe's slave at the moment, and I don't want to bombard him with sonnets because that's a bit gauche and not really what slaves should do. So I should probably give this to Ben Jonson or someone like that, because I remembered I did tell him that I loved him still, and that's all a bit awkward, and he doesn't really know about Christopher Marlowe. So yeah, I'll give it to Ben Jonson. That'll be nice. That'll keep him quiet for a little bit of time. So he invites Ben Jonson round for a cup of tea and a biscuit. Ben Jonson arrives on his doorstep and says, Shakespeare, I've been waiting to hear from you. I obviously came to your gala night and then heard your lovely sonnet that you'd written about me, and then a couple of months have gone by and you didn't contact me, so I thought, oh God, he's fallen out of love with me. Damn. But no, you haven't. Here you are. And Shakespeare says, yes, here I am, still very much in love with you. Do not worry about that, old Benny boy. And he says, sit down, Ben, sit down. I want to read you this latest sonnet of mine that I think is quite revolutionary, actually. I think it's quite mind-blowing, and I think you will appreciate it. And of course it is to you, it's dedicated to you. Don't worry about that. Obviously, I'm not going to say it's dedicated to you on the sonnet, so that people in the future read it and they won't know it's about you. But just between you and me, it's obviously about you. All right. Ben Jonson says, "Oh, that's lovely, Shakespeare. I've been wanting to hear one of your gorgeous little sonnets for the last few months. This brings me so much joy." And Shakespeare says, it's my pleasure. Please have a custard cream biscuit." And Ben Jonson partakes in a custard cream, dipping it slowly into his tea, while Shakespeare withdraws Sonnet 59 from his back pocket and reads. Sonnet 59. If there's nothing new, and everything that exists now has existed forever, then our brains are being deceived when we desperately struggle to write something new and still end up with an imitation of an imitation. Oh, I wish I could look back into the records, even as far as 500 years ago, when people were just starting to put their thoughts on paper, and see what someone back then had written about you. I'd love to see what the old world would say about your amazingly sexy body. Then I'd be able to see whether we're better at writing now or worse, or whether we're pretty much the same. Oh, I'm sure the clever writers of the past have given admiration and praise to worse subjects than you. Wow, so there we are. That is Sonnet 59. And Ben Jonson's back in the picture. Good to have him back, actually. I've missed Ben Jonson over the last few weeks. And Christopher Marlowe's seems a bit evil, doesn't he? What's he doing in Barbados? We still don't really know why he's fled London. I wish the writer of these stories would tell us that. It's keeping us on tenterhooks. Maybe we'll find out next week. Until then, bye.